is all about us as individuals. So we've spoken a lot about maximising the outputs of our team as our staff members, but this is all about you as an individual and what might you like to do differently or take away as a consideration. So just in terms of your leadership, this is ultimately likely to be your biggest differentiator in terms of your performance. So we're just going to look at some key metrics. So we've spoken a lot about the happiness of a team, and as daft as it sounds, a lot of that will come down to the leadership. Are you good at creating happy teams, happy individuals that want to come into work? What kind of energy is it that you give off? Are you a happy person or are you a bit depressing? So when it comes to the happiness of teams, the reason we focus on so much about morale is because it has a direct correlation to productivity, sickness, retention, outputs. So we spoke about it earlier, but that environment that you create is ultimately down to you to create. You're responsible for that environment. And when it comes to your team, do you play to strengths? So this is something I'm just thinking back to my previous role. One of the things that I spent a lot of time doing is observing what people were good at and what they weren't good at. But I also had a look at things like job roles, job profiles. And there were some things that were expected of my managers that at the time they couldn't do. And I was looking at the process and I was thinking, is it actually worth them doing it or not? An example was all about authorising court applications for their team. So I had 3 or 4 different managers. They would be responsible for authorising court applications. And it was taking them such a long time because they weren't particularly good at reading through things quickly, being able to analyse the rent account, knowing if PCAP had been adhered to. And it was perhaps taking 5 or 6 hours across the managers. I could do them all within, say, 40 minutes. So when you think about playing to strengths, when you look across your team, if you're responsible for officers or if you're responsible for managers, are you expecting individuals to do things that take them too long or they're not capable of doing? And is there anything that you can do to change the role or the responsibilities? So if somebody's not good at something, but they're good at something else, just get them to do more of what they are good at. Don't try and force a square peg into a round hole. Energy, super important. And then inspiration. So do you think that as leaders you inspire your team? Would you say that your team are inspired by you?
I feel like maybe like when I was back at officer level, I probably inspired them more maybe by like my performance and stuff. Probably was one of the top performers in the team. But I feel like when you move into management position, I mean, this is my perspective, might be totally different to the officer, but I don't know if I inspired them as much.
Yeah.
Obviously, because they probably viewed me in their role. They would have viewed me alongside themselves, whereas now it's different work, obviously.
Yeah.
Different kind of roles. So I don't know if it's the same effect as it was back then.
I often think as a manager as well, sometimes there's a tendency you have quite a lot of tasks, responsibilities, a lot of weight on your shoulders, and sometimes the team can see that. And sometimes it can give off negative energy, if I'm being honest. And it sounds harsh, but as a manager, you've kind of got to always try and be on it. And you can't let these things get you down, no matter what it is that you're having to contend with. Of course, you'll speak to your own manager and they'll help you through these problems, work-related. But in terms of the vibe that you give off to the team, you have sometimes just got to put all the bad things to one side. And there's a responsibility to consistently energise individuals. And it's not about showing something that's unattainable for them. It's not that there's anything wrong sometimes with just having a bad day, but if there's too many, it can sap the energy of the team. And this is where it is a responsibility on you to constantly be motivating and providing that meaning.
One thing I've probably learned since I've been in the position I'm in is there's 2 different ways of presenting the same information to people that might not be the news that they want to hear. And very much like you probably mentioned, Andy, before, when they see you as a manager, first thing, like a baseball wants to get wants progression, but then there's a way of, we're bringing in extended hours on our outbound, so I think, but also the way we've kind of sold it is is in the right way,
yeah,
then you'll get that buy-in. If it was like, so if this is happening, get on with it, then that's going to send off a negative vibe. It's about how you actually approach that conversation in the first place.
definitely. And this is an interesting one. So again, I don't want to get too sciencey, but just looking at the graph on the right, basically as individuals we can only concentrate for so long. So you have like what we call a cognitive bandwidth. You can only concentrate for so long before you get bored or before you start wandering. So one of the things that I'm seeing some teams do, and I find it quite interesting, they're introducing like mini breaks every hour or every hour and a half, whatever it is. Because basically what there's a tendency to do as an individual, you know you're working for the next 3 hours up until lunch and then 5 hours until you finish or whatever it is. And you try and stretch that energy over the course of those 3 hours or 5 hours. And the productivity can really suffer. If you've got regular breaks and you give people a regular chance to re-energize, you find that these inputs of 90 minutes actually give off super high levels of productivity. Because people know a break's coming in an hour or in an hour and a half's time, they actually go for it full pelt for that hour or an hour and a half, rather than thinking, Jesus, 3 hours till lunch, I'm going to have to stretch this out. You can only concentrate for so long. Does anybody do this? Does anybody have regular breaks? Have you thought about doing it or seen it?
I try and encourage if someone's had a bad call to go and just go and have 5. Few people that smoke are out, just sniff outside for a minute. We often get like, obviously our senior team leader Mark, he often comes around now every hour, so he tries to gain some inspiration, whether it's just having a bit of crack in office, doing anything that he can just to G some people up. And I think he needs that for his own sake sometimes, but it definitely gets some others laughing and joking though, and energies then back up. It
is an interesting concept, because I think at the moment we've got an issue with like staffing standards in terms of like people on the phones in the office and talking, obviously because we've got inbound and outbound telephony, the volume just going up and up and up, and people on the phone can't have a conversation with the customer. So I think introducing something like that, where you give the staff a chance to get away from the desk and maybe send that text or have the conversation to the colleague, it could perhaps improve productivity between.
Yeah, I remember we did it in COVID. Every hour, 5 minutes away, talk to your mate on Teams about something non-work related. Because I don't know if you'll all remember COVID. Some of the conversations were quite difficult in terms of the things that we're hearing. So it was important for the team to be able to just have 5 minute break every hour, just to take them away. But what I often found is that it was quite good for productivity as well. It was just by chance. But then when I started having a look at it a bit more, I realised there is a bit of method to the madness. And it's quite surprising how much people will produce over an hour or 90 minutes if they know there's a break coming. They know they're going to get some respite. So have a think. And then this is, again, I'm putting it back on you in the room, about yourself. So earlier we spoke about being busy, but I often say, are you a busy fool or are you productive? Because there's a massive difference between being busy and being productive. So how much of the time are you doing proactive work, or how much is it just putting fires out all day long? So if I had to put it back on people, how much would you say is proactive and you're planning, you're doing the strategic stuff, or how much is it just putting fires out all day long? You're just constantly reacting to whatever comes in. What would you say the balance is?
Do you feel like I'm firefighting a lot of the time?
Yeah.
Just you end up getting drowned with emails, and then
Go back to emails again.
Yeah.
Just need to change it.
Yeah. Got you starting one thing, another thing kicks off, and then you're on 70 emails, next one it's 100.
Yeah.
Like coming here today, I'm already
nervous.
What I'm going back to.
Yeah. It's so important that you put in your diary thinking time or time for specific tasks, because if you don't control that diary, you will just spend up all day doing your emails. And a question like, what kind of productivity is that? What are you actually doing for tenants or staff development or those interpersonal relationships? if all you're doing is this.
At Mobysoft on a Friday afternoon between, is it 1 o'clock and 5 o'clock?
Yeah.
There's no meetings, meeting free Friday, and it just gives people back 4 hours that they can resolve things that need sorting out before the weekend, or just give them that thinking time for the week coming up. It's worked really well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Knowing that you've just got a little bit of time to focus.
Does anybody have specific time where you're not allowed to put meetings in?
Yeah, 12 till 2 we block out every.
12 till 2.
Yeah, we've said we won't do it, but people still do it, don't they?
Yeah, some organisations do that. Some organisations start meetings at 9:10 in the morning rather than 9, because invariably people are doing a school run, or it's a bit of a panic to get back for that 9 o'clock. So people are starting meetings at 9:10 or 9:15, but still finishing at 10 if it's like an hour meeting.
We have no meetings Friday afternoon. Experience tends to be though that managers have got that many meetings anyway. It just ends up condensing more meetings into the 4.5 days, so you've not got any breathing time in between meetings. So it depends what other capacity you've got, otherwise you're just moving it from.
It's very true.
One
You
slot
get
to another.
invited to lots and lots of emails. So I've blocked 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon for the rest of the year. And people say that way there's only 4 hours
Yeah.
a day where someone's blocked. It's possible for someone to invite me to a meeting because you don't get anything done. It's just,
Yeah.
especially back to back. So.
Yeah. How about anybody else? Do you have a slot in your diary that you put in, say no meetings at such and such a time?
I have set things in my,
Yeah.
whether it be weekly or every month I have to provide that KPI information. And I have that in, but I shut my emails down now.
Yeah.
It's tendency when you get that little top up, you go,
Yeah.
what was that?
Yeah.
And then you lose that
Momentum.
rhythm that you was
Yeah.
in. So now I just
People still put meetings
shut it down.
Yeah. I just refuse them. Exactly. That's the point that I wanted to get to. Everybody thinks that their problem is the most important thing in the world. It ain't. If it ain't affecting your bottom line, if it ain't affecting your customers, it ain't that important. So when you're speaking about condensing those meetings in, when you start just saying no, they'll soon respect the diary. By all means, I'll warn you on that first occasion. You can see my diary. But if I get to a point where it's the same person putting a meeting in when I've got something else in, or I put no meeting, I just decline it and don't give them an explanation. They can see. If they just check the diary, rather than relying on me to check my own diary for their meeting, they'll see that I've got things booked in. You have to take control of that diary to do that proactive work. Otherwise, all you're going to end up doing is this firefighting, just getting drowned. So you have to just push back. And then, just in respect of some basics when it comes to leadership, I quite like this slide. There's 12 different things on here. I know it might be hard to read. I'll just go through them. So they take an interest in your life outside of work. So I know this is something that Mark does a lot. You ask some really random questions of people, don't you? But it's actually with purpose.
Yeah, I think what I've tried to do in the past when I've looked after teams is just find out a little bit about them, just a little bit about their friends or their family or their sons or their daughters, or what their hobbies and interests are. So the next time that I spoke to them, it clicked into my head that I didn't actually need to speak to them about work, but I just remembered something about them, and then that triggered off a conversation. Just something that really worked for me, and then you can build up those relationships and that rapport with people.
I think another important one as well is getting stuck in on the day-to-day when it's needed. So if we've got a problem with resource and we're low on numbers, I think staff really respect you when you as a leader get stuck in, get on the phones, help pick up some emails or some callbacks. And this is what we've just been talking about as well, is boundaries, respecting those boundaries. So obviously you want people to respect your boundaries when it comes to what you've got in your diary, or if it's a no meeting Friday, but just having to think about the meetings that you have with your team, like what you said earlier, is it a priority? Does it need to be the first available slot in their diary? Or realistically, you can see I've got 3 meetings already. Just put it in for next Monday. It'll wait. It's not a priority. And then probably just this one here. Praise in public and discipline in private. We spoke a lot about recognition, but ultimately the reason that we like recognition schemes so much is because it's a great way just to accelerate performance through that positive reinforcement. So every time somebody's doing something great, how do you recognise it? How frequently? And ultimately, where people are struggling, perhaps it's not the right job for them, perhaps they've just dropped below that acceptable bar. How do people find having those difficult conversations with staff? Other than difficult?
I think again, it goes back to where that conversation is delivered, and you say, look, this is our concerns, but what can we do to support you and how you get to these greater levels again?
Yeah.
Can we put a sport plan in place? You know, and just being open and honest and being there to care for them at the end of the day, and just. So we had one recently, didn't we? Where the said member of staff had took an email in a completely different way of what it was meant to.
Yeah.
And then we ended up having a face-to-face meeting where that information was divulged to us that she took it badly, and we had to turn that conversation around and make it a lot more supportive, and we brought that trust in her again. So I think again it's just about how you portray that and have a conversation.
Has anybody got any members of staff where they're just not where they need to be? You've tried and you've tried and you've tried, and ultimately it comes to a point where this is just not a suitable job for them. Had? Yeah.
We've got one now, the same person. So, I mean, they are difficult conversations to manage. And at the moment, we've put a performance plan in place, and we're reviewing that every fortnight. I think the next review is tomorrow. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think with situations like that, people have a tendency to sit and wait or sit and hope, and sometimes you think, please get better. But the best thing to do is it's a bit like ripping off the plaster. Don't put it off. You've got to address it, because like Mark said earlier, you're only really as strong as your weakest members. You need to get everybody up to a certain standard. So if it's something where you've got individuals in your team that aren't quite where they need to be or won't ever get there, don't put it off. Make it a commitment to yourself that this is something that you're going to address this year. It's quite a difficult skill to do, but it's necessary ultimately.
I think because rent sense is transparent as well, the officers can see each other's patches.
Yeah.
And what particular person that we're discussing now, you can see they're not getting through the work nowhere near as much as other people.
Yeah.
Start that negative kind of, well, I'm not doing all that, because they're getting away with it, nothing's about that same person. It can easily spread, can't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Just curious, you mentioned about that mobile phone issue earlier. What's your plan then to address that?
We're doing like an interact. We do a monthly update to each service basically, and part of a bulletin basically, like a newsletter that you used to do for us. One of the staffing standards, and we obviously want to support your well-being, support you in having breaks and stuff to have. Because we've seen an increase in data breaches basically, not through events, but through council tax and processing data incorrectly. So we've seen quite a few of that, and senior management when they're walking around before walking, they're seeing people on the phones, and then that's a distraction for not paying full attention. So we're just basically put it in as to everyone first, so everyone has the same message. We know as a management team who it is, and then everyone's on the same message, and if it doesn't change in the next couple of weeks, then we can approach individuals and say, well, you've had the message.
I think what makes it more difficult as well is obviously with agile working and things like that, we've got people sat around us who we've never spoke to before, perhaps don't know what team they're in, and obviously they're having conversations directly behind you and they're on the phones, and if you spoke to them, they'd probably think, who are you?
We sit with housing benefit staff in the same office as us basically. We don't actually manage manage them.
Like financial assessments and
systems, stuff like that.
Registrars.
You feel a bit homesick when you turn around saying, well, you can pack that in because you don't actually manage them.
So if we get some comms out, then at least we can go back off the back of comms and say, you know, you've seen the email.
Yeah.
Or the Microsoft Sway, whatever it is. I
do think mobile phones are a bit of a problem. There are different organisations that I worked with historically where they took someone down the disciplinary route because they're always doing TikTok videos when they should have been at work. And it's like, is it uncommon really? I don't know. I think there's probably an element of people being on the phones maybe a bit too much.
We had a similar issue quite a number of years ago, but we ended up making it a process and a policy that actually, if you're using you can have your personal mobile, but if you take a call or you text and you had to get up and move away from your desk and go to one of the breakout areas.
Yeah.
And then you could clearly see who was actually misusing that time as well.
In comfort break all the time.
Just this one here is all about emotional intelligence. So again, this is something that's going to really complement what you do. Because even when you have difficult conversations, there's still a right way and a wrong way to go about things. So being self-aware in terms of your own approach, being pragmatic and being empathetic, but also delivering it in the right tone. And another thing that's really important, and we spoke about audits a lot, is just feedback, regular feedback about people and facilitating those plans that they need to get to where they want to be. But again, be having zero tolerance for the intolerance. So we spoke about phones, and there'll be other things that people are doing that they shouldn't be doing. How much are you willing to tolerate? Because if somebody's getting away with it, then the person at the side of them will start to try and get away with it as well, and it can quickly spread. And then development, positive reinforcement is always better than just picking up on mistakes. So if I'm doing quality assurance, say I'm doing 5 quality assurance checks, I want to try and pick at least 3 or 4 that are good. Because what I don't want to do is give people 5 checks back and they all be rubbish. So it's an absolute killer for that person's motivation. So I want them to do more of the good stuff. So the best way to do that is to highlight all the good stuff that they're doing. So being really deliberate about the accounts that you check. Yes, we're going to have one in there that we can learn from, but we don't want people to dread receiving that feedback. So how can you pick out the ones that are really good? Because often what you'll find is that where you highlight where people are doing well, they'll want to do more of that. So how can you pick out the good stuff, highlight it, and then ultimately people have got a tendency to do more of it. And then just coming towards the end now, so we spoke a lot about managing time, but ultimately it's all about managing yourself. So being mindful about what you take on. Do you think that sometimes you have a tendency to say yes to a lot of things rather than pushing back? You end up being lumbered with more and more things each and every week or each and every month. Well, ultimately, the more you take on, the less time you have for those other tasks that you need to do. So be mindful about what your own capacity is. We spoke about the importance of those relationships that you have with staff. So I'd always recommend making as much time as possible for those one-to-one conversations, and put something in your diary that allows you to reflect and to be proactive rather than just firefighting all the time. And then increase your networking and your awareness of how your peers operate. You're really lucky in the areas that you work. You've got lots of really good performing organisations in the sector. So don't think you have to do everything on your own. Don't look to reinvent the wheel. Use the experience and the knowledge of those around you, and ultimately use that to bolster your own performance. Do people like the idea of networking and going to look at others and seeing what they're doing? Is it something that you've not done it too many times in the past, nipped over the road to whoever it is that's over the road? No? Time. Firefighting. Yeah, it is time, but ultimately it's one of them things that we spoke about earlier. Sometimes you've got to invest that time up front in order to save yourself time later down the line. And just don't put these things off. So we spoke about addressing poor performance of a staff member, and it might not be somebody in your team, it might be a colleague. They're a real blocker It might be a housing officer, it might be a housing manager, it might be someone in voids, it might be somebody in lettings. Just because you're not responsible for their line management, don't think that you can't take this challenge on and address it. Because ultimately, if they're really inhibiting what the service that customers are getting at the end of the day, as a result of not doing what they should be doing, then that needs to be raised. Challenge anything internally that's not working, and then be honest about yourself. So rather than just having an action plan for the team, what's your own action plan? What are you working on as an individual, either in work or out of work, to perhaps get rid of a weakness or to at least improve things? Does anybody do that? Have not something written down as such, but do you know where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are? And do you do anything about it? Or do you just rely on your manager?
I do loads of personal development.
Yeah.
Like, I'm always reading something or listening to a podcast or something. You know,
yeah. I find it really helpful.
I like to just not waste time in the car. So I use the car time to learn something.
A podcast.
Something I want to get better at, I know it is. Obviously, I'm early in my sort of managerial career type thing. I know it's something I look back on often and think, well, like I say, getting to that excellent sort of level, away from what's just.
Yeah, I dare suspect that the people who do progress, and do reach certain positions, that will be a result of doing a lot of things outside of work as well, not just the 9 to 5. So if you are an ambitious person, if you do want to get to X, Y, and Z position, it's probably something that you need to be doing. So I guarantee the people that will be going up against you for the roles will be.
Mindset stuff that I learn, it's almost like a bit of a shield, you know, like, because then if you have got other people that, it's just extra skills that if you've got someone in your team who is quite negative or whatever, it one protects your energy because you've got your mindset to that point where you're just not impacted by other people's energy, but also it gives you ways to sort of encourage them into a different mindset and realise that they are in control of themselves and their own energy.
And I think it's really important though, because sometimes you get too hung up on things that you can't control. Like, what's the point? If you can't control it, don't waste time thinking about it. Just focus on what you can do. So mindset is really important.